Look closely at a train wheel and a section of railway track, and you'll notice something that doesn't seem to make sense. The wheel is round. The rail is flat on top, maybe a couple of inches wide, and the wheel just sits on it. There's no groove, no channel, no physical barrier stopping the wheel from sliding sideways and off the edge of the rail entirely. A train weighing hundreds of tons, moving at up to 200 miles an hour, balanced on top of two thin steel rails, with nothing mechanically locking it in place. And yet trains don't fall off the tracks. Not occasionally, not usually, essentially never, under normal operation, across hundreds of millions of miles of track worldwide, every single day. The reason has nothing to do with a groove, a ridge, or anything holding the wheel in place by force. The reason is a piece of geometry so simple that once you see it, you'll never look at a train the same way again. To understand what is actually happening, you first need to look at the shape of the wheel itself, not from the side, but in cross-section, looking at the wheel head-on. A train wheel is not flat across its tread, the way you might assume. It is slightly conical. The diameter of the wheel is very slightly larger on the inside edge, the edge closer to the center of the train, and very slightly smaller on the outside edge, near the rail's outer face. We are talking about a taper of just a degree or two. Looking at a train wheel from a distance, you would never notice it. But that tiny taper is the entire reason trains stay on the tracks. Now here is the part that makes this elegant. Both wheels on an axle are rigidly connected. They are mounted on a single solid shaft, and they rotate together at exactly the same speed, always. On a perfectly straight, perfectly centered track, the conical wheels sit on the rails so that both wheels have the same effective rolling diameter. The train rolls straight ahead, no problem. But what happens if the axle drifts slightly to one side, say half an inch to the left? When the axle shifts left, geometry changes on both wheels simultaneously, in opposite directions. The left wheel, now sitting further onto the rail, contacts the rail at a point where its diameter is slightly larger because of the cone shape. Moving inward means moving toward the larger diameter section of the wheel. At the same time, the right wheel shifts outward on its rail, contacting a point where its diameter is slightly smaller. So now you have two wheels, rigidly connected on the same axle, forced to rotate at the same angular speed, but one of them effectively has a larger rolling diameter than the other. A wheel with a larger diameter covers more ground per rotation than a wheel with a smaller diameter for the same number of rotations. The left wheel, now larger, travels farther per revolution than the right wheel. The result? The axle does not just sit there off-center. It starts to steer itself. The larger diameter left wheel pulls that side of the axle forward faster, which turns the axle back toward the center of the track. The axle drifts left. The geometry responds by steering it back to the right. It overshoots slightly, drifts right, and the geometry steers it back left. The result is a gentle, self-correcting oscillation. The axle hunts back and forth across the center line of the track, constantly correcting itself, entirely through geometry, with no input from any control system, any sensor, or any operator. This is called the conicity effect, and it was understood by railway engineers as early as the 1800s. It is the reason solid axle railway wheel sets are inherently self-centering on straight track, purely as a consequence of their shape. Now, the conicity effect handles small deviations, the natural drift that occurs from track irregularities, minor speed variations, and the inherent dynamics of a heavy object rolling on rails. But it has limits. On its own, it cannot handle situations where the wheel needs significant lateral guidance, going through curves, crossing switches, or recovering from a larger disturbance. For those situations, there is a backup. And this is the part most people assume is the primary system, when it is actually the secondary one. On the inner edge of every train wheel, The edge facing the center of the track, there's a raised lip called the flange. It's a few centimeters tall, and it sits just inboard of where the wheel tread contacts the rail. Under normal conditions, on straight track, the flange does nothing. It doesn't touch the rail. There's a small gap between the flange and the inner face of the rail. The wheel rolls entirely on its conical tread, exactly as described. The flange only makes contact during larger lateral excursions, going around a sharp curve where the conicity effect alone isn't enough to keep the wheel set centered, or during a disturbance large enough to push the wheel toward the edge of its normal operating range. When the flange does contact the rail, it acts as a hard limit, a backstop that physically prevents the wheel from climbing off the railhead entirely. But it's a backup system, not the primary mechanism. Most of the time, on most track, under most conditions, the flange isn't touching anything at all. This is the opposite of how most people imagine it works. The flange looks like the part that's doing the job. It's the most visually obvious feature, the part that looks like it should be gripping the rail. But the actual job of keeping the train centered on straight track is done by the subtle cone shape of the tread, a shape so slight it's invisible to the eye. This system has a direct consequence for how curves work on a railway, and it's another detail most people have never considered. When a train enters a curve, the outer rail is slightly longer than the inner rail, simple geometry since the outer wheel is tracing a larger circle than the inner wheel. But remember, both wheels on an axle are rigidly connected and rotate at the same speed. The conicity effect handles this too. As the train enters the curve, the wheel set shifts slightly toward the outer rail. This puts the outer wheel on a larger diameter section of its cone, and the inner wheel on a smaller diameter section. The outer wheel, now effectively larger, covers more distance per rotation, exactly matching the longer outer rail. The inner wheel, now effectively smaller, covers less distance, matching the shorter inner rail. The same geometric principle that centers the train on straight track also allows it to negotiate curves smoothly, without wheel slip, purely through the changing contact point on the conical tread. On sharper curves, this effect alone is not sufficient, and the flange does come into play, along with track superelevation, banking the outer rail higher than the inner rail, similar to a banked turn on a racetrack, to help manage the lateral forces. But the foundational mechanism, even on curves, traces back to the same simple cone shape. There's one more detail that surprises people. This entire system depends on incredibly tight manufacturing tolerances, maintained across an enormous installed base. The conicity of a wheel, that 1 or 2 degree taper, has to be precisely manufactured and precisely maintained throughout the wheel's service life. As wheels wear from contact with the rail, their profile gradually changes. Railways monitor wheel profiles closely, using laser-based measurement systems that scan passing wheels and flag any that have worn outside acceptable tolerances. A wheel that is worn into the wrong shape, losing its conical profile, developing a flat spot, or wearing unevenly, does not just ride less smoothly. It can lose the self-centering behavior that the conicity effect depends on, leading to a phenomenon called hunting oscillation, where the wheel set's natural correcting motion becomes unstable and amplifies instead of damping out. In severe cases, this can become violent enough to cause a derailment, even though every individual component might still be within normal wear limits on its own. This is why wheel profiles are remachined periodically, a process called wheel turning, where a wheel is placed on a specialized lathe and the tread is recut to restore the correct conical geometry, even while the wheel remains mounted on the train. The entire safety case for keeping a multi-hundred-ton train centered on a pair of rails at speeds up to 200 miles per hour rests on maintaining a taper of 1 to 2 degrees across every wheel on every axle of every train on the network. What makes this system remarkable is how little it relies on. There is no steering mechanism, no sensors detecting position and correcting it, no active control system constantly adjusting anything. The entire stability of a train on a track, the reason it does not wander off the rails, the reason it can navigate curves without slipping, the reason it self-corrects from minor disturbances without any intervention, comes down to a shape. A cone, tilted at an angle so small you would need a precise instrument to measure it, repeated on every wheel of every train, on every railway, everywhere in the world. The flange is there as insurance, but the system that actually keeps a train on the rails, mile after mile, hour after hour, is geometry quietly doing its job, the same way it has since railway engineers first worked it out nearly 2 centuries ago. Next time you watch a train roll past, look at where the wheel meets the rail. That tiny, almost invisible angle is the only thing standing between a train staying perfectly on track and not.